Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We're so glad you could join us. I'm Ellen. I'm part of the team here at Navigate, and I'll be your tech support person during the session today. And before we get started, I just want to run through a few housekeeping items. I'll just let everyone know that the session is being recorded. We'll ask that everyone please keep your mics muted and your cameras turned off throughout the session to keep background noise and distractions to a minimum. If at any point during the session you run into technical problems, send me a direct message in the chat and I'm happy to help you out. If you have a question during the presentation, you can pose it in the chat at any time, and we'll have a little bit of time at the end for a conversation, so we'll answer any questions from the chat at that point. You can also join the conversation by using the reaction function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll ask you to unmute your mic. All right, I'll hand things over to Maureen and we'll get started.
Good morning, everybody. Again, we're very excited to be having a live webinar and to be having a conversation today. As Ellen said, I'm Maureen. I'm the co-founder of Navigate Food Safety with my partner, Alex, who you'll also be hearing a bit from today. So what we're shooting for today is to have a good conversation about how to make a step change when it comes to food safety management. I think we've all been in situations where you just decide you want to throw something out and start over. You know, the baby, the bathwater, whatever. You've lost confidence in the whole thing and you know it's fundamentally not working, or you've had some kind of an external motivator and you say, that's it. You know, my daughter's getting married, I'm going to lose 20 pounds. So you're ready for a step change. So today we're going to look at kind of defining what's a step change, what's different between step change and incremental change. We'll look at when you're most likely to be required to do a step change. We'll talk about how to get it done. And then we'll look at what works and maybe what to avoid based on our experience as going through step change with quite a few different facilities. So looking forward to it. And again, I encourage everyone to participate. That we are all better together and shared experiences benefit us all. And there are no stupid questions. Everybody's a little messy under the hood, so don't be afraid to ask or unpack something. So for right now, I'll turn things over to Alex. And again, I look forward to connecting with you in a few minutes. Go, Alex.
Go. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Today, we're going to explore step changes and its importance in managing food safety. So the agenda is going to be, we're going to explore what step changes are, and to understand that, we're going to contrast it with incremental change. And then we're going to look at specific examples and how to drive that change. And finally, we're going to look at the discussion. Maybe Maureen could have those slides next time. She's already given us that. It's pretty good. So the reason we're going to look at all that is because step changes and incremental changes, they are two big ways that change happens. Sometimes changes happen incrementally, a little bit at a time, and other times changes, we learn completely new ways of doing something, and that's the step change. Now, understanding the existence of those two ways of changing and understanding the distinction between the two is very, very important, because certain situations call for one type of change and other situations call for the other type of change. And usually one type will only work for a given situation. So if you need incremental change and you're trying to do a step change, it's not going to work. And conversely, if you need a step change and you're trying to change incrementally, it's not going to work. So we need to have those two tools in our tool belt. Otherwise, when we need the step change and we're trying to do it with incrementally, we feel like we're banging our head against a brick wall. And personally, I don't like that. Also, the reason we're talking about step change is because a lot of what we do in food safety is driven by the standards, by the GFSI standards, which we're all committed to, and that's a very good thing. But those standards are biased towards incremental change, towards becoming better at things we already know how to do. And unfortunately, the consequences that the certification process and the agents of certification, the auditors, are often resisting valid change if we're trying to do it incrementally, and they're telling us that's not good, we have to use measurable goals and things like that. So the agenda today is going to be twofold. First is we're going to learn about step changes, how to make it happen. And the second goal is we're going to legitimize step changes as an important way of managing food safety, so that we can do it, we can talk about it during audits, we can feel comfortable, and we can be fairly rewarded because auditors understand that when we've driven change, using step change, or so that they can reinforce and sorry, I'm drawing a blank, so that they can encourage us when we're using that method for change. As I said, the standards are often biased towards incremental change, and the reason, and we'll see a little bit later, that the difference between a step change and an incremental change is that a step change is required when we're not being effective just yet at what we're doing. And the standards assume that we're already effective in everything that we do, and they assume that we just need to be a bit more efficient. And an example of that bias would be the strong focus on the measurable objectives as opposed to qualitative objectives. And qualitative objectives is a very valid way to drive change, but they are driving step changes, whereas quantitative objectives are driving, obviously, the incremental change. So incremental change is an improvement on something that we already know how to doing. We know how to do, we're already effective. We're already getting good results. We just need to get a little bit better at it. Maybe improving efficiency, cutting down cost, improving profitability are examples of that. A step change, on the other hand, is when we are not meeting the target, when what we're doing is not effective just yet. So I'll give a few examples of that. If let's say we've got a good business, we're selling for $800,000, $1 million a year, and we want to reach $1 billion a year in sales. That's an incremental change. We're already selling, we know how to do it, we know how it works. Measurable objectives are very useful in this context. We're already tracking sales, it's a measurable target, and to reach our goal of $1 billion, we'll need to make some changes, but changes to things that we already know. We'll need to produce more, we'll probably need to invest in manufacturing, hire more people, more Facebook ads, and so on, but we know how to do all these things. So we can think of incremental change as scaling up. Another example in food safety, this one, let's say I have 30 mills in my portfolio. I'm a miller and I've got 30 mills. One of the very important things in food safety in milling is sanitation, because there could be bugs in the mills. There are bugs in the mills all the time. We can have a performance indicator, and for sanitation and mills, if anybody was in the previous webinar, we talked about, the number of beetles per bulk load is a good indicator, and 3 is our target. 3 is our cutoff point. So that's our current threshold. And if we wanted to improve incrementally, we could say, if right now I'm at 3, if I go down to an average of 2.8 or 2.7 as an average, well, that would be an incremental change. Even though it's a reduction, it's a small reduction in our target, and we're doing better and better, because in this case, 3 is, the less is the better. Or we could say, if I have, in the run of the year, I've got, within my 30 mills, I've got 10 incidents where we go over that threshold of 3. And next year, I want to go reduce that to 6 incidents. It's also an incremental change, driven specifically with numbers in food safety. So it's a very valid, incremental is a very valid way of changing. The whole point is. But step change, in contrast, is where we'll need to learn new ways of doing something. So if we don't know how to do something, or maybe we don't even know that something is possible at this point, odds are we're talking about a step change. Basically, incremental change is a change within the system, and a step change is this change to the whole system. We're not tweaking something that already exists. We're adding something completely new. If we go from operating under a certain set of rules here, and then we go to operating under a new set of rules, GFSI certification. Let's say we were operating under just regulatory compliance and we go to a GFSI certification. Well, that's a step change. That's an example of that. You can't measure that change in number because there's going to be, 1,000 things you're going to have to do differently. It's not a matter of saying, oh, I'm doing 98.2% better. There is a standard process for step change, and very quickly, first you develop new ways of doing things. In food safety, we develop programs. So we make a plan. We'll say what we'll do. And then we implement that. So we implement those new programs. We go from paper to reality. We start doing what we said we would do. At this point, sometimes doing the deeds provides the result we're hoping for, and at other times, we're sent back to the drawing board. In other words, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. The next step is being effective. Effective means that things are working. So we're reaching the goal of the program. But then there's still another step after that, because we can be effective and wasting a lot of resource, working a lot harder than we have to. And so efficient is the fourth aspect in this progression. And I will turn it to Maureen right now and see, she's going to talk about, she's going to start how to make that step change happen.
Thanks, Alex. So I guess to tie step change back to the industry, one of the things we look at is like, what would motivate anybody to go through the work of a step change? Step change is not easy. It is a big change, and it requires a lot of buy-in. So, sometimes you just get a wake-up call. So you've had some kind of a wake-up call, and it makes you realize that the status quo is just not going to cut it. That may be a very positive wake-up call. Maybe you've got a new customer who says that, oh, excellent, we want your product. You need to be certified in a standard benchmark to the GFSI. So suddenly you're staring down the barrel of the BRC or the SQF or FSSC. So a big gain often motivates people to change the way they do things. And often if it's a very positive thing, it's easier to highly motivate people to get into the work. Sometimes there's just a regulatory change. We all saw FSMA, or the changes to the Safe Food for Canadians regulation. The tide changed and everyone had to comply. So there's a new status quo, not the one you've already had, and you're either going to sink or swim. It's like the big hustle at the end. And of course, we all do the same thing. We have four years to do it, and we try to get it done in the last 10 months before we get in trouble. And sometimes you've had a crisis. You've had a recall, maybe some destroyed product, and the need is urgent for a step change. Anytime there's a crisis, that's not just a vague hint that things aren't working. It tells you that your whole system's failed and all of your checks and balances didn't work. So fundamentally, you've got to go back in, and you can't be confident that any of it's working. So you have to overhaul the whole thing. That's going to require some step change. And sometimes it's more subtle. Maybe you've lost your second quality manager in 6 months. The workload's untenable. You can't keep good people. You're ready for an overhaul. You might not know exactly where you need to go, but you do know that here is not okay. Everybody's sick and tired. They're bailing fast. Ultimately, if no one shows up to work, you are not a facility that manufactures anything. You are an empty facility that's not working. So it may feel subtle, but it's pretty serious. So at Navigate, we typically would see two different types of customers who are ready for a step change. Now, everybody's special. Everybody's circumstance is special, but the typical type of customers are kind of the same. So in the first case, you have someone who needs a certification and they're stumped. It's too big, they're worried, maybe they are familiar with regulatory compliance, but they've never worked in a standard benchmark to the GFSI. So they need to rethink how they organize themselves and start to work, in a system. They're making great product, they're growing. The second type of customer has probably had what we just described as a wake-up call, either the subtle one or the not so subtle one. They've probably got good people and good programs and they're doing all the moves, but obviously it's not working. So step change is pretty central to what we do every day at Navigate. So we developed two processes that are similar, but they support people at different places in the process when we are supporting them. So we took a page from Todd Herman, who created the 90-day year. And we became familiar with this a long time ago. And Todd describes his method for coaching Olympic athletes and entrepreneurs as developing and executing a series of steps that make the outcome inevitable. And I mean, we love that because ultimately, sometimes you know where you need to go. You're not quite sure how you're going to get there. But if you can trust the process, incremental or not incrementally, if you can trust the process of how you're going to make that change, as long as you get all the right steps in place, the outcome will be inevitable. So we have a path similar to what Todd uses, but we focused it on management systems and food safety. So for the new to certification customer, we would do something like a whole system gap. We start with diagnosing, like, let's look at your people, let's look at your plant and your paper. We give them a good insight into where they are, and then we dive deep into where they want to be. Yes, of course, certification's top of the list, but then also we talk about things like, okay, and do you want to be working as a team? Do you want to share the load? Do you want everybody to own food safety? Do you want to keep things simple? Do you want to avoid red tape? Do you want to stay within your budgets? So we build a very clearly defined vision of where they want to be, not just being certified. And then we take a step-by-step approach to making that outcome inevitable. So, and we hold that process of change because I always like to say it's really hard to be in the game and in the stands at the same time. When you're going through the moves and you're showing up every day and it's the same people and you're all doing the same thing, it's really hard to come in and say, okay, today people, everything's going to be different and we're going to work on different goals. So often we are operating from a coaching perspective and a guiding perspective while people are busy in the game of doing what they do every day to drive revenue and to keep the place viable. So then we also work on something that we call a deep dive, and it's for the second type of customer who's had a wake-up call. And so it's a similar process, but the customer is more mature. They have good programs. They have programs. They maybe hold a certification already. They've got processes, they've got documentation, but for some reason it's not working. So we do something really simple and straightforward, much like the other, where we say, okay, let's talk about where you really are. Let's talk about what you're really doing. And then we look at where they want to be. And obviously it's out of the crisis. And so then we dive in and we work on making every part of their system simple and effective and solid and something that really works for them that they can manage every day. So basically we act as agents of change while people are going through step change. And we're also, we provide technical expertise. Both these processes require absolute commitment and buy-in by everybody on the team. Not surprisingly, when the organization's highly motivated and they're willing, like I said, either by the excitement of a new customer or something perhaps more drastic, they can really get it done. They will have success. And they do get to what I like to call a better day at the plant overall. So that's a couple of the ways that we learn and use step change every day with customers in the industry. And so Alex is now going to unpack the step-by-step of a step change. And perhaps you can just keep that in the back of your mind for this is the process you take in either one of those scenarios. So I'm going to flip it back over to you, Alex.
Excellent. Thanks, Mo. Yeah, so we wanted to look a little bit at what we do every day, so that because that's how we learn about and step change, and that's how we kind of play with it and experiment with it. But here's the recipe that we use for both of those projects, if you want, and a few more. The first thing we have to do is we have to have a vision, and Maureen gave the example of the vision with the whole system gap, which is not just being certified. Well, actually, I'll talk about that. First, we have a vision. Then we do a reality check. The third step is to develop a roadmap. So we imagine how to get from where we are to where we want to be. That's an act of creation. It's not necessarily the path that you will follow, because we're going to learn at every step and we're going to adjust that path. But at least we have an idea of how to get from here to there. And finally, we have to make it happen. So we make a plan, and then we have to act. So I'll get back to those four steps. I'll say a bit more about those 4 steps. The first step is vision, and that's what I started to say a little bit too early. There's a big difference between saying I want to be certified and saying I want to be certified and I want our team to work as a team, and we want to be ready every day, and we want things to be simple, and we want people to be engaged, and we want people to understand everything we're doing, and we want to do things for the right reason. So those are 2 very different sets of goals. It's important to define the goals first, because when we do the reality check, then we're going to check our reality in relation to those goals. If our only goal is to be certified, if we think of the whole system gap there, or the first circumstance, if our only goal is to be certified, then all of our focus is going to be on the standard and meeting the standard. If our goal is to be certified and be ready every day and work as a team and keep things simple, then our reality check is going to involve not only looking at what is it that's missing to meet the standard, but it's also going to include what is it that we need to do to keep things simple? What is it that we need to do to work as a team? What is it that we need to do for people to understand? How will we know when we're doing the right thing and when we're working for, how will we separate when we're doing the right thing from when we're doing what the standard said or what we think the standard says, but really it sounds fishy. So the reality check, again, is based on the vision. And then we develop a roadmap, and the roadmap is not one big swoop. Usually it's a number of small incremental change itself. And each one of those small change needs to benefit the organization, and it needs to benefit everybody that's going to be involved in the change. And there needs to be, enough stepping stones. Like each one of them is a bit of a stepping stone. You can look at it. There needs to be enough to take you from here to there, but not so many that people lose track of what's happening. And then finally, we said, we have to be the change. So you have to make it happen. So those are the 4 steps. And now we want to learn at a few things that we've learned as part of this process here, a few other ideas that we've learned, a few tips and tricks. And really, I said that we learn about step change through the work that we do with our customers, but also we're a startup, and as a startup, we have to be changing all the time, because we are creating something new, something different. And that's the reality of startups to do step change and to pivot all the time. So when COVID hit and everybody said, "Oh my God, we'll have to pivot." Well, we and all the other startups had a bit of a head start because we had a lot of practice. It's a daily reality for us to change by steps. One of the first thing is when you want to make a step change, you need to understand the problem before you even start making the plan. And because otherwise it's just, if you start acting before you understand the problem, then it's whack-a-mole. Like you whack-a-mole when it comes out, and then it comes out in another place, and then you whack it over there and goes back under and it whacks. So that's the wrong way of doing it. If you want to have a concerted way of doing things, then you need to understand the problem. I'll give two examples of this. One example is at the very large scale in food safety. Right now, the Global Food Safety Initiative has a big project on auditor certification. It's a huge project. People have raised red flags. One of my big red flag is that I'm not convinced that they understand what the problem is, because they're focused on auditor certification. But I think what they're really trying to do is they're trying to bring trust in certification. And trust in certification is a much bigger problem than auditor competency or auditor certification. The whole raison d'être of the Global Food Safety Initiative is for people to trust food safety certification. Eh? So if they're not achieving that, then their whole mandate is questioned or jeopardized. And right now, if they're focused, they might be focusing on just one small input to that bigger problem. So if you think of a flat tire, when you have a flat tire, there's no sense frigging with a windshield wiper. It's not going to fix the tire. You have to fix the problem where it is. And in order to fix the problem where it is, you need to understand where it is. So in the same way, if the failure is with trust in certification, then they have to work on trust, not work on the auditors, or they have to at least understand all the factors that impact that trust. If we use a smaller scale example, if your programs are too complicated and your people are disengaged and your people are confused, and because they're confused, they're not as engaged as they could be, there's no bolt-on solution that is going to make your programs less complicated. You need to understand the nature of the problem.
Alex, I'll jump in
here
because I think
pretty please.
In the understanding the problem, I think with almost everybody we've worked with, and just certainly in tons of examples, it's a brave move to really look at the problem and to look at all the sources of where the problem's coming from, because sometimes you just say, oh, I don't even want to touch that over there. It's so big, it's so complicated. Well, it's big and complicated.
To solution.
It's easy to jump to solutions because, of course, we want the path of least resistance, and a full overhaul is a lot to embark on, and it is a ton of work. However, you will wind up, just as you said, doing the whack-a-mole. So it's a bit of a brave move, and you have to be super open to honestly look at the problem. If you say, wow, we cannot overhaul our programs to make them more simple. Imagine the people who are working in those every day, all of them. So it has to be a bold and brave move, and it takes a strong motivator.
It takes
to be able to be brave enough to go to the bottom of it.
And it takes a lot of fortitude to be able to look at the problem long enough to understand it without thinking of the solution right away. It's not something we're used to. And that's one thing that we see. And because of that, then it kind of leads us to phone a friend. I mean, I'm going to skip this one and come back to it in 2 minutes. There's a big difference between, like the examples I gave earlier, the GFSI trying to resolve their problem of a lack of trust in certification, and at a company level, programs being too complicated and trying to simplify them. There are some problems. There is a known path for some problems, and other problems we just haven't resolved them. Like nobody's ever resolved them. And the example of the GFSI, like a big difference between that and what we do every day with customers is with customers and with everybody that implements a new standard. Then the path is known. Even when people have go through a big crisis, it's been done before. There is a path that exists, but resolving a big problem like what the GFSI is looking at requires a lot of requires a lot of creating a new path. And that takes us.
And
go ahead,
Alex, to that point about the path, I think it is. I mean, I think there are many parallels. As I said earlier, everybody's special and everybody has special problems. And they are particular to their industry or this facility or to this product. But there are parallels and the steps kind of remain the same. And so you don't have to reinvent the route to getting it done. You just have to plug in your particulars.
Yeah.
Plug in your particulars. Others have done it. People have taken themselves from the brink of disaster to being incredibly high performing. We've seen amazing examples inside the industry of people who have gone from the absolute worst failure, the worst food safety failure, to being poster children for high performing teams and how you do it right. Right. So those are people who are who are bold enough to own the problem and find a path out and,
and drive the change and own
and
it
drive the
do
change
it.
and get it done in the worst possible scenario. So it can be done and you won't be the first one doing it. Yeah.
In the spirit, in the interest of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go very quickly through the last few slides. And I'm going to open it up for a conversation because we want to have a conversation and we're at the half-hour mark where we wanted to start the conversation. So the other few things that we've seen is phone a friend. It's so much easier to do it with somebody else. And Maureen talked about like the role that we play when we hold the process for our customers. We hire people in our business. We hire people to be our friends when we're trying to implement changes to our own business, because it's so much easier to do the work and not have to hold the process while you're doing the work. Another thing we've noticed is being positive. Like there's always, when change happens, you need to surround yourself with people who are going to be positive and who are going to be pulling in the same direction. And if some people are pulling in the opposite direction, it's not time to do that when we're trying to drive change, because it's hard enough to drive change with all the factors being aligned. If some people are resisting and pulling in the wrong direction, it halts the whole process. I had a slide on validate and verify, and I had the slide on the mindset. Those are two other factors, which I think I'm going to just skip and jump straight to the conversation. Before I jump to the conversation, the goals were to learn about step change, and we've talked about a lot about step change, and I hope we've talked about it enough to start legitimize it and show how important it is in food safety. But really, this is where we want to be, I think. So I saw there were some hands that were raised. Are there questions or comments or?
I don't see a question in here, Alex, right now. I think I'd be very interested, if anybody has any question or comment about it, about step change, if anybody is either facing a step change, considering a step change, or maybe you've successfully gone through a step change or you've seen somebody else do it. But I'd be very interested to hear about that. Or again, any questions about details for how you actually get it done.
If not, we have a ton of other content that we've prepared, so we can always jump in there.
And if you want to jump in and just pose a question, you can turn on your camera and turn on your mic, and we can do what we can. Alex, could you go back a slide or two? I think there's a couple of things in there, unless you have something else you want to.
No, go right ahead. A slide or two, which
you had a couple of last slides that we didn't talk about.
Because we didn't talk a whole lot about the positive. We didn't talk about the verify and validate.
I think you had one on getting
mindset.
people on your team.
Well, I think the positive and constructive, that's where we talked about getting people on our team. It's very important when you when you do a step change. And I suppose one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about step changes, because it forces us to think about what's working, what our process is, and as we were talking about it as we were preparing for the webinar, one of the important things is to get people. I said that it's very important for people to all pull in the same direction, but that doesn't happen by accident. As anything else, it happens through deliberate actions. So when we do a step, when we facilitate a step change with a customer, then we have a whole process to making sure that their team works as a team. So we have a whole, have a training on teamwork. We have a structure for dividing the work, who's going to be responsible for what, and what are going to be the checks and balances. So we've got that as part of that process. When we look at the step changes that were involved at the industry level, and I'm thinking specifically about the changes to the certification process and the big project that the GFSI is working on right now, I can see that there are people pulling in two directions, and it's very difficult to, it's stalling progress on that front. And so maybe you want to say something about the Posse and
I think David may have a question. I'll quickly weigh in, David, just before. I'll say this from the perspective of observing people trying to make step change. One of the things we talk about with training and teaching people perhaps a new way of doing things or changing the lens through which they see things related to food safety is that we always say we offer a discount for the second person on a team sometimes, because if two people come back with a great idea, you're more likely to be supported. So what I know from trying to pivot or make change is you usually have to select the people who will follow right away and get a couple of winners on your team. Make a posse. Sometimes the decision for the step change is made by a small group of people who say, okay, this is untenable. We really need to get to the bottom of this. So it starts out with a small posse, and then they move those tentacles into the organization. So you kind of try to get the low-hanging fruit in first, the ones who are easiest to roll, and then everyone else starts to follow. And I see that as being a very effective way, because you can't just push change down from the top. You have to give every good person on your team the opportunity to adapt and adopt the change, and you have to include them in the process. And like I said, give them time. You can't think about something for 6 months and then say, hey, today we're just going to make everything different. Including people and bringing them along for the ride and giving them the space to adopt something new is extremely important. So maybe build a posse and make sure you include people in the process. But anyway, I'll turn it over to you, David. Do you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, well, a comment. I was trying to raise my hand, but I can't figure out on here how to do it. So I figured take myself, show my face and just raise my hand like this. But, one of the biggest things that I'm seeing as far as the need for step change is with culture within the organization, because right now, especially since COVID had started, retaining your staff has been very complicated. I've heard that. You guys have heard that. I'm sure everybody that's on here and the companies you work for have seen that. And, but there was always a culture that directions were handed from the top down, where I see more and more now the team effort where the supervisor is allowing the team to have more of a say in what they do, coming up with recommendations. I saw something on LinkedIn yesterday that talked about the best type of manager or boss is one that supports their team in trying to move up in the company. And, so I think that's very important as far as you're talking about step change with food safety goes, is being able to engage with your team and get them involved, make them feel like they're part of the organization and not just another body.
Well, and we have to understand that all those bodies have potential to make or break you.
Absolutely.
You know, like the whole question of top down, like there's a few things that you're saying, David, that I find very interesting, or that kind of very interesting. First of all, like you're talking about culture and you're talking about empowering people. You didn't use the word empowering, but basically that's what you're describing.
Yeah.
And engaging and the turnaround in the industry. And I think like how those, when I'm talking about, you know, when we say, oh, here's a problem, we need a step change, and we need first to understand the situation. I think understanding how those four components and maybe some other components are related to the whole problem with turnover, that's very, very interesting. And as you say, it's extremely relevant. And when it's happening, it's the biggest, one of the biggest concerns in the industry. Never mind with food safety, it's, you know, the turnover is stopping productivity. Like, so that's a big concern for the industry. So,
you know, there's a phrase that Maureen always uses that says better. She says better together. There's something that I always use with my customers, that I always say: protect your company, protect your clients, protect the consumers. And, you know, when you look from the inside out and understand why are you doing these things, there's many companies that don't go through the effort. There's the mandatory part that they don't have a choice, but then there's the building a culture internally to where you're creating a better company. And I just think it's so important. Yes, and empowering your team was the word that I was trying to think of before, but I think it's such a critical part of you know, growing your company and creating a better atmosphere internally and externally.
And part of empowering your people is to give them specific actions they can take. Because, you know, like when we're talking about engaging people, it's one thing to say, okay, you know, you can stop the line when there's a problem, but that's sure, it's giving power to people. But what are the specific actions that people can do every day that will contribute positively to the food safety or anything else that's happening within the facility? It can be human safety, it could be you know, productivity, it can be anything. What are the things that operators or supervisors can do to participate that brings an immense sense of accomplishment and worth? That is, it brings me back to the other question we were talking about. Are we talking about top down or bottom up? And I think the kind of the blind spot here is to say, is it this or that? And I think my experience and our experience at Navigate has been that it's been both. Is that for success really happens when we use both approaches. You can't just start bottom up because it's chaotic if it's just bottom up. It can be just top down because it's disempowering. It's, you know, but it's got to be coordinated. So there needs to be a portion that comes from the top to the bottom because coordination happens that way. It also needs to be grassroots so that it needs to be relevant. It needs to make sense. It needs to be acceptable to everybody in the organization. So everybody needs to be, you know, we need to mesh in a way the top down with the bottom up, and that's how we've seen huge successes at on a grand scale. So
okay, Alex, I'm going to jump in there, and you're right. I agree 100%. I could talk about that all day. But in the interest of wrapping up in our 45-minute timeline, I'm going to very quickly whip through wrapping it up for those who have to bail now and maybe want 15 minutes before they have their lunch. So we are going to stay on for the next 15 minutes to bring us to the top of the hour. So please feel free to hang out and we can have more conversation. So as you can see at Navigate, we're taking a fairly active approach to resolving issues at the plant level, at the corporate level, and within the certification industry itself. Alex is going to single-handedly change the GFSI. Just joking. We're making plans for our next webinar, and typically we would announce a topic today. But now that we've pulled off a few webinars and we feel like we have a rhythm and a bit of confidence, we feel confident enough to say, is there a topic that you would like us to discuss? You may have something front of mind and perhaps you want to have a conversation about it, or you want us to weigh in on it. We'll be sending out some emails, or you can drop something in the chat right now if you've got something burning. And we'll be putting out feelers on social media. So based on feedback, we will loop you back in on what our next topic's going to be, because we really do want to be relevant to the industry and to what's in front of people every day. So please weigh in and stay tuned. We're currently working on a refresher training for lead auditors. We've got new trainings coming on. We have online trainings already available. We've got several master classes running. I imagine a list should be coming on your screen right now. We do customized training. Everything we work on is geared towards capacity, and we avoid theory as much as we can and just use as much as we need. So if you enjoyed our conversation today, you can find us at any of these touch points. We have a Facebook community you can join. Ellen's going to drop a link in the chat, and all feedback's good feedback. We will take anything you have to say, because this really is we hope to make things better. This is, again, the stuff that gets us out of bed in the morning and what makes us excited. We like step change. So what you may see as a big challenge and something insurmountable, we actually love to bring a solution to make it easier and bring a better day at the plant. So thank you to Alex and Ellen, and for David for chipping in there. So those of you who have to bail now, enjoy the rest of your day. And if you want to stay for a few minutes, you can flip on your camera or not and join a bit more conversation. Have a great day, everybody.